So welcome everyone to this day 3 of IEEE Online Forum on Climate Change Technologies. And we have had quite interesting set of talks so far and very well-attended talks covering different aspects related to climate change. And today we will start with another interesting talk, which is about IEEE SusTech initiative by Maike Luiken. Okay, thank you very much. So about the talk, this IEEE SusTech Directions Committee, and it seeks to contribute technical expertise and solutions to address sustainability challenges, including climate change. This initiative is growing rapidly and new volunteers are always welcome. So you can have a chat with speaker about after this talk about how you can connect with SusTech initiative. But very briefly about the speaker today, a very distinguished speaker we have. Maike has done, she has been IEEE Vice President for Members and Geographic Activities. She has served as President of IEEE Canada during 2018-19, and she has been for more than 15 years a very strong supporter of sustainable development. So you will see a lot of insight into sustainability in her talk today. She is Managing Director R&D at Carbovate Development Corporation, a startup company, and also she is an adjunct research professor at Western University in Canada. In Sarnia, Canada, she led the Blue Water Sustainability Initiative during 2006 and 13. And she was the founding director of the Lambton Manufacturing Innovation Center. For 8 years, she served as the dean at Lambton College with various portfolios. Some of them are School of Technology, Sustainable Development, Applied Research, etc. And her strategic leadership in the development of applied research and innovation capacity and portfolio led to Lambton College becoming one of the top research colleges in Canada. She has more than 30 years of professional experience in teaching, applied research, and educational administration, leadership and community building, especially linking industry partners, government agencies, and researchers in advanced technology initiatives. As far as her areas of interest and expertise are concerned, they span diverse technical areas from ICT, energy, and water to advanced manufacturing. And she has particular interest in how progress and deployment of various technologies contribute or not to achieving sustainable development. She is currently serving on numerous boards of directors and committees, including that of IEEE, IEEE Canada, IEEE Canadian Foundation, Canadian Standards Council Steering Committee for Canadian Data Government Standardization Collaborative, Tech Access Canada, where she is founding member, and Unmanned Systems Canada, and the list is quite long. Which just speaks about the extensive experience that our speaker today has. Maike has experience in public and private sectors in Canada and has worked in the USA and Germany. With this, I would pass on to the speaker, the floor to the speaker. Please, Maike. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction, Ravinder. I think in the future I will share less information.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's good that participants need to know who they are, kind of your background, and yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
There we go. Can you see the presentation mode?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. And first of all, I'd like to recognize that Wei-Jian Li is on the call, and he is the other co-chair of the IEEE SusTech initiative. So we will call upon him as well to potentially answer some questions. And you have gone through all of this. So one time years ago, somebody told me that you should always have a slide about yourself so people can refer to it. And you should always show where you come from. one of the things I'd like to point out here is that I've got a couple of bylines, and that is that if we want to innovate, we need to interact, which is what we do today. And if we actually want to achieve sustainability, long-term sustainability for the Earth, then we really need education. People have to be knowledgeable and have to have data in order to make decisions. I live and work in Sarnia, Ontario, the birthplace of the North American oil industry, or close to it, 30 kilometers away, but also at some point the site of the largest solar farm in the globe at 60 megawatts, and site of many wind turbines nearby, and beautiful recreation. So a very heavy industrialized small city of about 80,000 people. All right, let me say the context in which SusTech was conceived and is working. So our context is that we have global challenges, and I will elaborate on this a bit. We can also call it a global crisis or global crises, like multiple. And one of them that's really standing out in terms of the urgency is the climate emergency. And of course, with it comes an uncertain future. So there's lots of detail about the different existential challenges that we're looking at. It's the impact of the climate change that we have been experiencing and continue to experience. We measure it in terms of the increased level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We have had tremendous population growth. We need affordable, clean, renewable energy for them. We need ubiquitous access to clean water. And we lack today and need equity and inclusion. So, but we like to call it as that we are in urgent need of, and we are ready for solutions that address these challenges and crises. And that's really in terms of three categories. One is financial, one is political will, and the third one is the how in terms of engineering and technology. And most of the attendees here at this gathering, that's where your expertise is. I like to put this a little bit in terms of a long-term goal. And the long-term goal would be that we have a healthy, sustainable planetary atmosphere. That means essentially all life forms on Earth are essentially sustained in the long term. And if we break this down into the challenges, and this is in no particular order, is that the United Nations has developed the Sustainable Development Goals. So achieving these goals, and they were set out to be achieved by 2030, some doubt that we're going to get there. But at least a roadmap has been laid out. So achieving the UN SDGs, and it goes from social to energy to water and so on, is one. The second one, and it's pulling actually one SDG out, which is SDG 13, and it looks at climate change. So we need to address the accelerating climate change and the climate change damage that's already caused by global warming. So that means that we need to work on reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere in order to prevent further elevation of greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere. We call that mitigation. And at the same time, we need to work on how we adapt to the current impacts and those that are to come. So when we look at the current impacts, we often refer to the severe weather. And so those are very urgent demands to address the severe weather impacts. And the prevention of further greenhouse gas levels rising is it's more long-term. And in the much longer term, we need to, like after 2050, what we are hoping to get to is starting to lower the greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere. So we get closer to pre-industrial levels and get back into balance. So that's on the greenhouse gas and climate change piece. We also have done a lot of damage to ecosystems on Earth, and we do need, for the long term, to regenerate those. That's also going to help with the greenhouse gas emissions, of course. And I already referred to the point that we have had we could almost call it a population explosion. I don't want to, exaggerate here, but in my lifetime, the population on Earth has tripled. So that means that we are putting quite a bit of demand on the resources of Earth. And if we do want to sustain this, then we need to implement a circular economy. In other words, not generating waste in order to maintain resource availability to sustain our activities. So that's sort of the long-term planetary biosphere laid out in 4 goals. And I'm going to substantiate them a little bit and then go into the discussion of SusTech. So this is for your reference, the UN Sustainability Goals, Sustainable Development Goals, apologies. And ultimately, they are aimed to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all by 2030. And you see they're going from no poverty to clean water and sanitation, to reduce inequalities, etc. Okay, so global warming or change happening. These are the changes relative to the 1950 to 1980 averages of average temperatures across the globe. And you see that there's much higher anomalies, as we call it, around the polar regions, in particular in the Arctic region. So the effect of the changes in the greenhouse gas emissions are different around the globe. And so we have to watch that we don't only look at the averages, we have to look at the extremes that are being caused, because that's where the impact is, and we have to look at the local impacts. So the averages are minimizing the emergency, I think, in our language. Some people are doubting that those carbon dioxide, and I'm moving now from greenhouse gas levels to carbon dioxide levels, because this is what has been measured. Greenhouse gases, of course, include other gases than just CO2, like methane, for example. So we do have a record of carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere to about 800,000 years back, based on ice cores. And this is to substantiate my claim that the greenhouse gas levels have been rising rapidly in the industrial age, and that's what you see here. Let's go on. So that was the CO2 levels. Now we go back to greenhouse gas emissions by sector. So where do they come from? And this is essentially showing that close to 3/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions that we have been generating and are continuing to generate, this is 2020 data, are all related to energy. So the energy sector is our key sector to look at. We need to look at others as well, but in terms of emissions control, we need to look at the energy sector first and foremost. And of course, agriculture, but yes. Okay, so expressing this in terms of other people speaking, sustainable energy, clean energy is mandatory, and that was actually laid out by Ban Ki-moon in 2014, then the Secretary General of the UN. Energy is the golden thread that connects economic growth, increased social equity, and a healthy environment. So sustainable development is not possible without sustainable energy. And that puts it square in the wheelhouse of IEEE. Just to illustrate this a little bit more, this is in percentages where the primary energy comes from by source. So oil, coal, gas, then we have nuclear, hydropower, wind, etc. So this was also 2020 data, or at least published in 2020. And so we see that the clean sources, some renewable, not all of them, only comprise about like less than 16%. It's a little bit more now, maybe. I actually have to double check that, but in that order. So if we want to get to a low emissions or net zero emissions energy supply, then we need to change essentially the generation or the energy. We need to replace oil, coal, gas, and that is like 84, 85% of the energy that we consume globally today. So it's a huge task. And I think everybody realizes that we cannot do this entirely without considering not only the reductions of emissions, but also the capturing of emissions and sequestration of these emissions. And there we are talking mainly about CO2. So this is a diagram that Bill McDonough put out. He's a gentleman that came out with the cradle-to-cradle idea way back when. But essentially talking about our regenerative biosphere on the left, my left, maybe your right, and then a circular technosphere of durable carbon. So in other words, what he's saying is that we will continue to mine or harvest or use coal, oil, gas to a certain extent, but we should only use it for durable goods. And as we are still producing some carbon emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, we also need to invest into carbon capture and storage or carbon sequestration, as you can see on the top right of the diagram. So that's laying out that piece. On the way to, or in between reducing emissions and carbon capture, there are lots of ways that we can change in terms of how we're handling the technocarbon and other materials when we're looking at the life cycle of goods. So we can not use as much, resync, reuse, repair, refurbish, etc., all the way down to looking at the leftover remains, that's the end of use of a product, and bringing it back into the feedstock for new product. Steel is iron. Steel is a prime example. We've been doing it for years. We are now looking and already doing it with garbage plastic, reducing it back to oil essentially, and like the basic molecular molecules, and oil, that is generally speaking oil, and then are in the position to make essentially hospital grade, medical grade plastics again. So you see, this is a big smorgasbord of opportunity. So where does IEEE figure into this? So IEEE at its core has a mission of fostering technological innovation and excellence for the benefit of humanity. So we are highly engaged. And so what we are looking at is for meeting those global challenges through responsible technological transformation. in that is in many sectors, power systems, communications, healthcare, infrastructure, transportation, and so on, along with metrics so that we can make good decisions, revised decisions, and model forward, make predictions. So we form focus groups, we cooperate, converse, discuss. We have a meeting today. We build technology roadmaps, standards, and ultimately try to maintain our reputation of being a fantastic, trusted source of knowledge. So in support of the original goals that I laid out, we have a number of initiatives. One is the Future Directions Committee SusTech initiative. Another one is the Planet Positive 2030 initiative. We do standards, including socio-technical standards, standards that try to build in ethical considerations and sustainability considerations by design. We have the TAP climate change program, and so on, and many activities led by IEEE societies like Smart City, Smart Village, Empowering a Billion Lives, and so on. And one slide on the Planet Positive 2030 initiative, and hence I'm the chair, so I took the liberty to share it, but just for you to note that the first edition of the compendium is planned to be available on November 18th. So there's a link, you should be able to find it there. And now we get to the SusTech initiative. You have a QR code to get to the website here. And as I said, Wei-Jen Lee is here. So here we are. There's Wei-Jen Lee as the second co-chair of the initiative. We have Christopher Witt, the previous chair of the Oceanic Engineering Society, my apologies. Rakesh Kumar, William Tonti, Carol Grass. We work with Muhammad Kapuchali in the Arctic, in Anchorage. Ed Perkins is the link to the IEEE SusTech conference, which is going, I think it's 12th, so 13th instantiation, 12th, I believe, in April in Los Angeles. And then we have listed those three, including Christopher, as liaisons to different activities. So this is the steering committee, and we do invite other people to join us on the steering committee. So please feel free to let us know if you would like to be involved. The main activities so far are listed here, and they were based at by looking at essentially some of the topic areas that were covered in the Planet Positive 2030 initiative, but also looking at, okay, how are we going to try to solve these big problems, these global and overarching problems? Are we going to look at ecosystems? Are we looking at sectors? Are we looking at disciplines, or a mixture of all? So we essentially tried it in different ways. So we looked at the energy sector with an in-person workshop to look at low carbon emissions, energy technologies road mapping. And so we considered energy storage, grid modernizations, and renewable scale-up. And I'll report in a moment what came out of this workshop. Then we looked at this workshop at oceans, an in-person workshop again, because the oceans are, or the ocean, people have changed the language, but ours was still oceans at the time. The ocean is seen as a huge opportunity for a marine carbon dioxide removal, MCDR. At the same time, the ocean is an environment where we have very little data. Christopher Witt was saying that if you're peeking, your eye at the ocean, your telescope, you see, you have less information than if you're looking at Mars. So we have a look at that in a minute. The next one, we looked essentially at another sector, but in this case, infrastructure. So roadmap to low carbon emission building materials and architecture. And then we looked at the very fragile or highly impacted region of the Arctic. So what are the energy technologies for the Arctic? So the two later workshops were hybrid, and there was an additional just online workshop for energy as well. So in terms of outcomes here, just want to mention that I follow on to the in-person workshop on carbon dioxide removal and the measurement, reporting, and verification thereof is a IEEE industry connections activity on MCDR. So all of this happened between July 23 and May 24. And right now we're in the process of planning next year, and I'll have a couple of things to say about that as well. So what did we learn? Just a sec. Rather than going through each piece in terms of technology, I want to focus a little bit on commonalities and essentially the problem statements. So with respect to energy systems, the low emission energy systems that we were discussing in 23, one of the items that came out loud and clear at the workshop was that once we have like getting grids that are decarbonized is not sufficient, we actually need to achieve the circularity of the infrastructure. So how are we going to get there? There's a lot of electronics involved, and electronic waste is a huge problem. The other piece that was brought up was the customer. Customers would like to make good choices on when to use energy. So in other words, they would like access to data in order to make informed customer choices. And ultimately, of course, that should lead for them to lower costs. So the ask from the customer side for access to data on how to use the available electricity at what time of day, etc. When we look at the buildings and architecture workshop, one thing that came out very loudly was that, yes, we can look at new materials and we can build new architectures, like build with new architectures, new like passive solar, etc. But the largest portion of the infrastructure is existing infrastructure. Like new infrastructure will only be added relatively slowly to the existing infrastructure. So if we want to reduce the energy use of the existing infrastructure, then we need to renovate. And depending on jurisdictions, there are regulatory barriers to renovations. And in other jurisdictions, there is a very strong encouragement for renovations. In other words, you cannot sell a building without it meeting certain standards. And that becomes very costly. So it's a financial piece. Of course, people are looking at new structures, new technologies. And so there, the problems that are coming up is to build trust in new novel materials, not necessarily new, but novel to people, and to figure out how to break away from traditions and get buy-in. So regulatory issues and of course data and knowledge in terms of how to actually go about renovating the existing infrastructure in the best way. When we get to the Arctic regions, in the workshop, it became apparent that there was not necessarily full consensus on the impacts of climate change. And the reasons were interpretation of data. And further behind that is that we only have spotty data. In other words, we measure where we have access to taking measurements, but that doesn't mean we have measurements everywhere or data everywhere. And so that leads to challenges of interpretation of data. So a big problem statement is that we need to reliably monitor, report, and verify change in climate indicators in the Arctic regions. Another discussion point that came up was that if we drive change in regions that are benefiting economically greatly from the current energy industries, for example, or the current energy sector, then that generates conflict. So we need to solve conflicting economic and impact issues. When we look at the Arctic regions, of course, it is many communities, the majority of the communities, of course, are remote communities. So even if you wanted to put a wind farm in place, for example, there may not be cranes up there or even deployable to bring big wind turbines into the north. So it is a different different location in terms of accessibility for putting infrastructure in place. So there's a focus that's needed on practical approaches for energy microgrids transformation. Interestingly enough, the workshop was at the beginning of May, and that was the best time for solar panels because they actually not only caught the sun as like limited hours, of course, there, but because the snow was still on the ground, they would capture the reflected sunlight as well. So the capacity of the solar panels to deliver was the highest in the year. So we need to look at location-specific solutions, not global solutions to global problems, or not only global solutions to global problems. But we have to have solutions, need to focus on context problems and to devise contextualized solutions. That also applies to transportation fuel. So electric batteries or EVs in the high north really experience some severe problems because of the temperature to operate those vehicles. Okay, so that's the Arctic. And then we had the Oceans workshop in actually October 23. So also last year. And the opportunity for oceans was one particular sector, and that was and essentially carbon capture and sequestration. So marine carbon dioxide removal and the associated requirements for measuring or monitoring this removal, reporting it, and verifying it, because we are talking here about a nascent sector startup companies that are whose business model is essentially selling carbon credits. So this is a nascent, maybe not even startup, but nascent marine decarbonization industry that is looking at how to scale up on the one hand, and on the other hand, how to verify their claims to successful CO2 sequestration. Part of this is that these companies are fully vertical, so they essentially do everything from putting equipment together to reporting at the end, mostly. And so as startup companies, there is a need to, so ultimately, what is happening is that there is a need to standardize the equipment qualifications for this MRV process and the measurement methods, processes, etc. So in order to support this marine carbon dioxide removal, it is necessary to build the critical MRV infrastructure and processes. And of course, that would then hopefully lead to trust in carbon credits. So if I look at the overall information, there's a lot of technical pieces in the background, and we can talk about the details maybe another time. But the importance of trusted knowledge, so we can actually move forward with decisions. But that is reliant on reliable data, transparent monitoring, analysis, verifiable reporting, and then, of course, trusted modeling and forecasts. So all of these different approaches to look at the energy system on the one hand, looking at a region like the Arctic, looking at a sector like buildings and architecture, and looking at the very specific application in the oceans, all needs more data, needs transparency in how we handle the data, and modeling to go forward. So maybe digital twins comes into this to be able to forecast and to make good decisions in terms of achieving a healthy, long-term sustainable biosphere. So as I said, like the technology selection and then the implementation and scale up becomes hugely important, for example, in the ocean application. So we talk about, on the one hand, the carbon removal technologies here, where we remove the dispersed carbon through different ways of doing so, like direct air capture of carbon dioxide and then sequestering it in whichever form, direct capture of marine carbon dioxide, and so on. And on the other hand, we are talking about decarbonization, in other words, reduce the carbon footprint of activities so we don't actually generate so many emissions. And so there is the energy transition to clean renewables, low carbon emissions buildings. So we see two sides of the coin of dealing with emissions. The decarbonization on the one hand, on the other hand, the technique of removing carbon. And wherever we look at the removing carbon, where we use new technology, we need to work with startup companies to help them in the technology selection, the processes, the verification and implementation in order to facilitate scale up. So I'd like to invite you to engage with SusTech, join working groups and to chart the path ahead. And it's not just directly the SusTech initiative, but all the different pieces that we are working across IEEE. For example, an SA industry connections activity on marine carbon dioxide removal, or we have another one on green hydrogen. I think there's going to be one coming on, at least some people are working on a proposal regarding nuclear small modular reactor technology. And we can invite you to start a new one. Create a new or work with an existing standards working group. It's hugely rewarding work. So if you're interested, you can send me an email afterwards and I can connect you to various activities. Directly with the SusTech initiatives, we are looking at workshops around green data centers, ocean sensors, and actually we want to start a webinar series potentially on circularity. So looking at different areas of application for circular economy. And so potentially we can also start new road mapping activities. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much. And I think I missed one slide. Sorry about that.
Oh, well, thank you very much for taking us through the IEEE SusTech initiative. Very broad range of activities that IEEE SusTech is doing, and thanks to Future Directions, IEEE Future Directions for supporting these activities. So I would like to now invite participants to ask questions. You can use the chat box if you wish to write the question, and I'll read out. I'll try to summarize if there are similar questions from multiple participants, then I can try and club them together. Charlie has also mentioned Maike's name, email in the chat box. That's another option if you would directly would like to reach out and want to connect with SusTech initiative. So that's another link. So any questions from participants?
And I'd like to recognize Wei Jen Lee. Maybe say hello because he is the
yeah,
co-chair.
Wei Jen Lee, please, if you would like.
Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, that as Maike mentioned, we welcome everybody to join this effort. This is multi-platform, multi-discipline effort. And then in addition to the mitigation, we also looking for the adaptation. But when you look at adaptation, we have to understand where do they come from and how do they impact to the system. So we need everybody's expertise to work on this way, and then on this way here, then the whole IEEE, we have a common goal, and then try to make this planet a better place for live.
Thanks, Wei Jen. I have a question in the chat box, and the question, Mike, is what do you think is the most impactful activity? This question is from Charlie, and I'm assuming he's referring to the wide-ranging activities that IEEE SusTech initiative is exploring. And among them, what do you think is the most impactful activity?
I think I'm still a bit divided on that, but in terms of the most impactful activity is if we can come up with ways to collect data and share data and knowledge in a transparent fashion so that people have access. Okay, so one of the things that comes into that is we collect data with different devices and with different accuracy and so on and so on. So I think there's a lot of work that we should be doing in terms of building essentially the decision background for people. So there is the data piece, and then there is the piece around information on technology. Whatever was true 2 years ago is most likely not necessarily true today. Compare that, like, for example, with respect to solar panels, in terms of the financial impact of using PV solar. So there's changes all the time. So what I'm trying to get to is that when we make a decision, we need to be willing to revise it or reconsider it a year or two from now, because things have changed financially, technologically. We have measured different things. So one of the biggest things we can do is try to work on figuring out how we can provide good decision backgrounds for decision makers.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's very important when we try to look at this one here. We try to first, of course, we try to have a data to understand the severity or the trend on the system on the planet Earth. And then second one is how can we convert those data into information? And then that is from the information to the action items, because we have to do something. We cannot just sit down and talk and then try to just look at the data by itself. It's eventually that is the action item. And so that is basically from the SusTech point of view, we have identified several important ones. That one is the energy generation side. The second one is the ocean side, because the ocean covers 70% of the surface of the planet. And then the third one is on the architectural building material side. And then also we see a lot activity or a lot of alarming change in the Arctic region. How can we quantify it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is basically a lot of area we are working on this, and they are all important topics.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Weijian. There is a question from Peter in the chat box, and is asking, mixing carbon dioxide, water, and energy, CO2 can be recycled as a very compact energy source. And the question is this part of a viable solution when we look at energy?
So I have not looked at that part yet, but ultimately the ocean is a huge energy container, so to speak. Okay, so one of the items that is under consideration to look at from the energy side is not just the harvesting of energy from the ocean, but also how does that play into electrification of shipping and electrification of ports? So how can we look at those pieces in one system? So I think one of the big things that, like you asked about, like what is important here, is that we take a systems approach. We have to look across jurisdictions, we have to look across technologies, we have to look across sectors to actually come up with solutions that make sense. Right? So,
well, thanks for that. And there is another question I can see from Mitradeep, and he is asking, is there any standards that one need to check before commercializing novel materials for building or architecture?
So there's a lot of regulation around buildings and architecture. So ultimately, in any jurisdiction where you build, you have to look at the regulations, and they are different in Germany, different from the US. I'm coming from Canada, so they are different here, different in Japan. And that's not only regarding the materials and the but also the structure, because it's different whether you are in a earthquake zone or not, for example. Okay. Okay, and so it's the local regulations, and that's rather important.
Yeah, and for the building part, then you try to look at the material side, and then we call that one, and then also the recycle the building. After the finish, the end of the life, demolish the building, then we call that part is embodied carbon emission. The other part we have to look at is operational carbon emission. So that is on architectural side. the HVAC and then some other the building code that has related to the requirement on the architectural side. So we have to cover on both ends, from the basically starting point to the end, and then it's some and all everywhere in between.
The big system.
Yeah. There is a follow-up question from Peter, and that follows the question about where the previous question was mixing CO2, water, and energy. But now the follow-up question is, how about CO2 from atmosphere, energy from sun and water to make hydrocarbon fuel?
So I have not looked in detail at that solution. And one of the big pieces I mentioned earlier is we need technology, we need political will, community acceptance, whatever we are doing where, and we need the finances have to work. And so I'm not sure where the cost sits here. So we can maybe with Peter look at that next year in this forum and look at different ways of using CO2 and energy to not only make new fuel, but also new product. Because I actually have been looking at lately at a few companies that are looking at using CO2 to stabilize product, make new product. You know, I mean, we use it for drinks, right? Carbonated drinks. So there are ways of using CO2. There are also many different ways of sequestering CO2, like in basalt formations, for example. The sequestration is rather permanent and starts within hours. So within 10 years, you would have CO2, at least from looking at the papers I've been reading, sequestered permanently in ocean floor basalt formations. So there are huge opportunities, and maybe one of the biggest pieces that we can do in SusTech is look at the different technologies on an ongoing basis and compare the pros and cons, not only that simply, but one of the big enablers I think that's going to happen to play into this are co-benefits. Not only a direct benefit, but a co-benefit. For example, if we use hydrogen as an energy carrier, where the hydrogen is converted back to electricity, you also get about 7 liters of water based on a kilogram of hydrogen. So you could provide water and electricity at the same time. On the other hand, in order to use electrolysis for the generation of that hydrogen, you need probably around 20 liters of water, depending on how clean the source is, to make a kilogram of hydrogen. So you should not do this in a water-stressed region. So there's lots of system pieces that need to be looked at whenever we make new technology decisions.
Yeah. Going back to Peter's question.
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
There's a company, our company, that makes jet fuel and alcohol, vodka out of thin air. So that is a way to do carbon sequestration. I especially like the vodka version.
Yep. So there's a huge playing field here for startups. And that brings me back to the one problem area that we discovered, or that came up in one of the workshops, and that is the verification of the technology to actually make sure it works the way it's advertised, and then look at how it can be scaled up. Do we need to develop standards at the same time along the way of technology verification, implementation, and scaling up in order to open up the markets and encourage regulation in different jurisdictions? So Where we are with SusTech in FDC is looking into all these different aspects to see how we can best scale up technologies that will help us to build this sustainable future.
Well, thank you very much for the wonderful discussion about IEEE SusTech. We are running out of time now. To all participants, the recordings will be available related to this talk, this session, as well as other sessions of this online forum. They will be available to you at a later date. So I would like to thank Maike one more time for your wonderful presentation. And before we start the next session, I would take a 2 minutes break so that our next speaker can set up, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.